Well, hello everybody and welcome. Thank you for being here today. I'm a couple of seconds early. I've actually been sitting here just kind of waiting to hit the button. So anyway, thank you all for being here. We have some new celebrities and we have some Esperanza. Good to see you again. Thank you for being here. Anyway, there we are. And so more people will join us as we go. But out of respect for you, I just wanted to make sure we got started on time. Also, uh, this is being recorded, so it doesn't really matter to you because you don't have nobody can see you, nobody can hear you, and questions that you ask will appear on my screen, but nobody else will see them. And I know that we've been having some really good questions lately, and I thank you all for doing that. I'm going to shut a couple things down here real quick. Here we go. I apologize. I forgot to turn my fans off and get all that going. So here we are. We are at the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors, and my name is Kevin Burke, and there is my telephone number. Hi, Holly. Welcome back. Holly is my gatekeeper to make sure I have the right screen up for everybody to see. Thank you, Holly. Uh, and I might even owe you an email. I don't know. Am I supposed to send you something? Anyway, there's my telephone number. I'd really rather speak with you in person, if only on the phone. So, but if we can't make that connection, let me know when I can call you back, or you can send me an email, and I'm happy to help you in any way that I can. And the more I think about that, Holly, I think I do owe you an email. I'm trying to think. I got a couple of emails. Tuesdays and Thursdays are tough, so very busy those days. So anyway, so here's some credentials. I do have a broker's license in both California and um, Virginia, and I do teach in both. I'm a certified DPOR instructor in the state of Virginia. So that's kind of like a DRE instructor, that kind of thing. And I am a school here apparently as well. DRE has approved my 5-hour RPA class for continuing education credit. So 5 hours. I like to teach. I like to train. That's my whole goal in life. So I want to make sure that you're doing okay. So I've been in the business for a little while, a little bit over 40 years. I know that since before a lot of people were even born, but I always tell everybody it's not that I know more than anybody else. I just outlived everybody. So there's good news in that. I do teach continuing education for attorneys, by the way. So MCLE approved classes at UCSD, and I'm in the middle of a semester now, or trimester, 10-week, or whatever they call it. So I'm in the middle of teaching that class now. And I taught at the colleges. I taught at 3 colleges, some of them simultaneously. Subject matter in the lower left-hand corner. On the right-hand side of your screen is what I'm all about, which is risk management. And then next year, of course, I will be the chair of legal affairs for the California Association of Realtors. So I just keep showing up, and hopefully you do the same. You don't need to have these credentials to do well in real estate. You just have to have a good resource. That's all you need to have. Okay, so we're going to be talking about stuff that's going to appear to be legal. I am not a practicing attorney. I have no desire. I do have the degree that they have, the law degree, but I knew my last semester in law school, there was just no way. They work harder than we do. We make more money than they do, but good people nonetheless. So my trial work, which I do a lot of trial work, is limited to testifying as an expert witness. Standard of care is my specialty. Agents' duties of inspection and disclosure and market conditions in San Diego County. And so our conversation today, not intended to be a substitute for the advice of your broker, nor for that of your attorney. Please consult with them as appropriate. And so every once in a while, somebody will ask me a question, and I realize I have to kick that back up to the broker level and tell them they need to talk to their broker about that. But for the most part, I can handle general questions and stuff like that. So please feel free. Our talk today is intended to be interactive. Please ask questions or offer input by utilizing the Q&A button. And I do look forward to hearing from you. I really do. And so a lot of times, this is just kind of a free, open discussion. If we were standing in a room, which I'm kind of planning to start doing that again next month at SDAR, where I'll be doing live classes, hopefully, assuming they'll have me, right? I mean, I don't know. But I usually get pretty good attendance, and it's interesting for me because people just seem to be more open to asking questions. So please ask questions. Type them into the Q&A field. let me know what your thoughts are. And if I say something that you're concerned about, please let me know. Hey, Roman, welcome back. And please let me know. Okay. All right. So that being said, today, and this has to be one of my favorite subjects. Nora, hi. Are we able to view this recording later? Yes, Nora. Actually, there's at the end of the tail end of this, I will give you the links to get to the YouTube. So I load all of my videos up onto the YouTube website. And today being Thursday, I'll probably load all of this week's up this evening. And so they will be up there. And of course, I have them in there in the order in which, most recent ones first. So, Nora, thank you for that question. Good question. Yeah, sometimes we need to go back and take a look at stuff. And so I assure you the Department of Real Estate is looking at what I'm doing. And as our the California Association of Realtors, I see things that I say in my webinars that they change some of the forms and things like that, which I'm kind of proud of that. I'm not looking for finding fault with anybody. I'm really just looking for, to help. I want to make sure that, as I said earlier, everybody's doing okay. So today we're going to talk about the TDS, the SPQ, the SPQA, and the Avid. And I got to tell you, it's probably among my top 3 favorite subjects. So you're going to get the passion. You're going to realize that this is really some fun stuff that we'll be talking about. So let's get to it. This afternoon, I'll be doing disclosures. It's really more of a drill down into statutory versus contractual. On Tuesday, we did all about disclosures, which was just kind of a 30,000-foot level. But this afternoon, we'll be drilling into the statutory versus the contractual disclosures. So certainly a must attend opportunity. Tuesday, I'll be doing Master My Farm. I have a meeting with the EO on Monday, so hopefully I'll be there on Tuesday. And then Tuesday afternoon, I'll be doing how to create the winning listing presentation, which for me is a lot of fun. And again, from the practitioner side of things, I know other people teach this class, but listen, I'm a doer, right? 40 something years in real estate, and I'm just a doer. So, I'll show you my secret of success without filling you with a bunch of hobbob stuff. So anyway, so thank you for joining us today for our discussion of the TDS, the SPQ, SPQA, and the Avid. And so first question, of course, is why are they required? And so in California, there is no buyer beware. And in California, it's caveat vendor, which means seller beware. Okay. And I missed that slide. It's not there. So anyway, caveat vendor means the seller needs to be aware. So why the seller? The seller, because it ensures that those with the most knowledge of the property share that information with the buyer. And then the agent to assure that the real estate professional does their due diligence in the real estate transaction. And so never do I hear the word professional used so much in our business, except in a court of law. And so, in the legal channels, when they're trying to make a case against us as real estate agents, they put, professional in 10-inch bold letters up on the PowerPoint for the jury to see. And then, of course, then I come in and just, ruin their day. But at the end of the day, you are a real estate professional. Remember that when you decide you're going to do business with people. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the Easton case. And again, we're not going to go into it like we did on Tuesday, but I do want to talk about it. I do want to show you some things if I can find it. Here we go. Easton. So there's this famous case, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to slide through it. And by the way, at Roman, as you know, all of the material that I have in here, I am more than happy to share with you. So if you send me an email, just send me an email, say, hey, Kev, can you send me all the information from today's class? So of course I've got this version of Easton I've got annotated. So let me give you the Cliff Note version of what's going on. So in the Easton transaction back in 1976, the Eastons purchased a home from the Strasburgers, and so they paid roughly $170,000 for it. And the appellant, that's the people that didn't do so well in this transaction, was actually the real estate agency. And so here's what happened. And this, by the way, this was the genesis of California Civil Code 2079, which we're going to talk about. And that is our obligations under law. of what we have to do in a real estate transaction. So again, my job here today is to educate. I'm not here to make you afraid. I want to show you that it's really not that difficult. But in the Easton case, the seller was very well aware of mudslides, some soil instability issues, and things like that. And in fact, they'd had soil stability issues just prior to the sale to Easton. Easton comes along. Nobody told them anything. Real estate agents didn't tell them anything. Real estate agents weren't told anything by the seller. The seller didn't tell them what was going on with the property. So they sold it, and they said, "Too bad, buyer beware." Well, this was kind of like the turning point of buyer beware. And so the problem for the agents was that there were some red flags. The agents conducted several inspections, and there were some red flags that they realized that there might be some problems. They did not request soil stability tests, and they did not suggest to the buyer that they have them. And so the good news is, over the many years, we've gone from the buyer beware to seller beware to, yeah, seller beware, but buyer, you need to also do your due diligence in a real estate transaction. So unfortunately, in this case, the real estate agents knew some things about the property. There was some wire mesh netting holding down some ground that had some soil slippage to it, things like that. The floors weren't even, the floors were buckling, things like that. So the holding of the case, of course, affirmative duty to conduct a reasonably competent, diligent visual inspection of the residential property listed for sale, and to disclose to prospective purchasers all facts materially affecting value, right, or desirability of the property that such an investigation would reveal. So I pulled this up because you've heard this before, right? You've heard this in the TDS. You've heard this on page 3 of the TDS. You've heard this in the Avid. And we're going to hit those forms. I want to talk to you about those forms. So this again was the genesis of that. The real estate agent just really needed to kind of be alert to what was going on. And in this case, they knew, they weren't told by the seller, but they knew that there was a problem. And they didn't bother to say anything to anybody. So that's again the genesis of the Avid form, the agent's visual inspection disclosure form that we're going to talk about here shortly. Okay, how am I doing, Holly? I'm doing okay, right? So that's kind of the Easton case. And again, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but has anybody have any questions about any of that so far? Easton was a good case. I mean, it was interesting. And I practice in Virginia as well, and it's the complete opposite. In California, the agents have to disclose, those things that they know about the property or should have known about the property. But in Virginia, it's see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. And so thank you, Holly. Thank you, sweetheart. Okay, so anyway, so that's Easton. Easton's a good case. But again, it changed the way that we do real estate. Okay. All right. And as it should. I mean, I'm a strong believer, in the immortal words of Pete Selecki, who is our attorney at the San Diego Association of Realtors. They can't sue you for what you tell them. So essentially, we're going to talk about telling people things. Okay, so let's take a look at the field case. The field case to a lesser extent, but on the field case, we have Field versus Century 21 Cloud and Finesse, which, by the way, was a really good brokerage firm. It just had some bad luck, right? So their agent, it was a statute of limitations case, by the way. The Field case was really not about the agent's duty in the case, although the dicta, which is the language that came out from the judge's opinion, did have a lot to do with it. I mentioned 2079 earlier. Here it is, section 2079. That's going to be our agency disclosure form. And so in this case, they quote the Easton case, all of that. It was a rural property. The reason that the agents had some problems was that the agents were misinformed about the size of the property, for one thing, but they were also misinformed about an easement that was on the property and how extensive it was. So, but then here's the wrinkle. The real wrinkle was the buyer did not get, and the agents did not get, the preliminary title report until after close of escrow. And so if you've watched my webinar on how to read a preliminary title report, you need to be going over that document, and you need to be discussing it with your client. And so I think a really good webinar, it was certainly one of the most popular ones that I've done. I've done it several times now, so it is also up on the website. But In this case, the buyer did not get the prelim. So after closing, of course, they get the prelim. They open the prelim up and they see that the Otay Water District has the ability to dump one of those big towers that's up on top of the of a hill, of a mountain. I guess they would call it a mountain for our purposes, a fairly low mountain. But it said right in there that it would flood the subject property, including the residents. So and that's, you see that under B in here. And again, I'll send all this to you. The problem was that the agent said that, there's where the property is, the easement's no big deal. So the agent minimized a lot of these things, only to find out later on that they were not as minimized as she thought. So again, we get in, I don't want to get into a discussion of the difference between fraud and negligent misrepresentation, but fraud and intentional misrepresentation, kind of the same thing. You intended to deceive someone. In this case, it was negligence. She was just negligent about the statement that she said. She thought that it was a larger parcel than it really was. She thought that the easement was not as big a deal, and so then the purchaser relied on her statement as an expert, and as the judge says in their opinion, there was no obligation for them to research it on their own, because they were given assertions. Excuse me, wow, English. Assertions by the agent that everything was fine. She didn't recommend inspections. There's all kinds of problems with this property. So field case is one of those things where, when I talk to real estate lawyers about this, they kind of scratch their head and they go, bad law. And I'm not sure I really agree. I mean, I don't think that, again, this was a statute of limitations case. Could they file the lawsuit more than 2 years? Because 2079 holds for the suits to be within a 2-year period of time. But the reason why the court didn't think that was a problem was because this was for a different issue. So anyway, again, I'll send this to you. But there we got it again. Reasonably competent, diligent visual inspection of the property, disclose all material facts such an investigation would reveal. Okay, so 2079 establishes a statute of limitations for breach of those duties from 2 years from possession. So, and then a very big long conversation about the Easton case. But yeah, about Easton. So I wanted you to see that, and good. I want to make sure I moved my other computer. So usually I could look over here to the left, but now I got to look behind me. So that was the field case. We talked about field. I want to take a look at my TDS. Okay. I love the TDS. I think the TDS, and I've written a whole bunch of notes on this, but I'm going to take us straight to it. So we're going to go now. We're going to go over to, I'm going to take you to our template, and hopefully you're using templates. Okay. Hopefully you have real estate transactions. So for example, I have a seller listing template. I have a buyer offer template. I have a lease template. But in this case here, I'm going to pull up my TDS SPQA Avid template. And why do I use the templates? The reason is because I know that when we update the forms at the state level, I know they're going to update the forms in my template. Okay. And I say that very specifically. They're not going to add new forms, but in this case, I really don't need new forms. Okay. I want them to make sure that I've got the current version. So when I'm looking over here, Holly, I'm good. Over here, I see 623. That's a big plus, right? Because I want to make sure I'm using the current form. These others haven't been touched. Exempt seller disclosure, updated 6 of 23. SPQ, 6 of 23. Even the addendum was January of this year. So we're gonna hit on all these, and we're gonna spend a little bit of time on them. But again, this class is not quite only about theory. Okay, this is also about practical perspectives on things. So let's take a look. So I've got my TDS. Again, I love my TDS. I think this is, listen, if I'm going to get hauled into court, it's going to be something about this that's going to be the reason why. And it was updated most recently, and I'll send you the red line version if you want, but we added this property as a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. We added this language on the top of the page. But more importantly, the top of this talks about what we call in law, we call it the recitals, right? So it's the linking part of the document to the rest of the transaction. So we want to make sure that this information here is completed properly, right? City of, county of, thank you, state of California. I argued for the longest time because they just left that part blank, and it's like you're only going to use this in California, right? So okay, so and then described as, and this would give me the physical address of the property, not the legal description, but the physical address. Then it talks about the statement of disclosure as of the date that that this is written. But I want to call your attention, Holly, bear with me here for a second. So I want to call your attention to a new quick guide. Where did it go? New law. I'm sorry. There's a new law. Here it is. Okay, so you can see that. Good. Okay, so this one down here. So disclosures required by the TDS law, and this is effective this year. So on the date the parties entered into contract shall be the disclosure requirements that apply to that contract. So listen to what that says. Disclosures required by the current law in effect when you put your transaction together shall be those disclosures required currently. In other words, if we change the law in the middle of the transaction, keep moving forward, keep doing what you're doing. You don't need to update anything. You don't need to do all that stuff. Is everybody okay with that? Any subsequent changes to the TDS law after the parties enter a sales contract will not apply to that contract unless the statute says otherwise. It says we're going to grandfather that in. So again, I'll send this to you. But TDS law is a big law. It's California Civil Code 1102. It contains a lot of stuff. Okay. All right. So let's I want to show you that. I'm going to get rid of that one here for a second. Oh, we're going to talk about substitute disclosures in just a second. So I'm going back over here now. So now I understand that this date is the date that the seller says, as of this date, this is the situation with this property. Okay, so this date is really important. Now I see a lot of times I'll get these where they haven't completed the date. The agent hasn't filled in the date. The seller hasn't filled in the date, and that's going to be a mistake. Okay, all right. So then I get into paragraph or section number one. Sorry, section number one. And in here, we're going to talk about our substituted disclosures. All right. And so CAR came up with a really good dissertation on this. And again, I'll send that to you. But essentially what we had before the more recent iteration was we had the first two that were in there. Nobody ever knew what to do with it because there isn't a lot you should do with it. So the law came back, the legislative body came back and said, hey, you know what? I think we're missing the boat. We need to make sure that the seller has paid attention under section number one. And so they stipulated legally that they wanted it now to have no substituted disclosures for this transfer. Okay. They wanted to add that language. And remember, the TDS is created by the legislative body. Okay. So real estate, Brian Jones is the only licensee that I'm aware of in the state legislature. I'm sure there may be others, but he wasn't around for the creation of this. This happened back in the 90s, 1995. This happened many years ago. But I remember because I remember meeting him before he actually was successful getting into office. But no substitute disclosures for this transfer. Okay, so with that being said, I wanted to call your attention to section one. This is a quick guide, CAR's quick guide, substituted disclosures of the transfer disclosure statement. And they do a really good job. My hat is off to them, but TDS came into effect in 1987. And so it goes through all this stuff. Why was no substituted disclosures for this transfer added in here? And then this is their, this is their iteration on that. What is a substituted disclosure? And then again, section number one specifically mentions the NHD report. Is the NHD a substitute disclosure? And et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'll send this to you as well. We won't be spending a lot of time on that one, but I wanted you to know that it was out there and that good, you could see it. Okay, so good. So let's go back. That's my substituted disclosure. So in most cases, what does that translate to? It translates to you're probably going to check the box that says no substituted disclosures in the transaction. The seller will check the box. Remember, you do not check any boxes. Remember, the TDS belongs to the seller on pages 1 and 2. Okay, and so and again, I teach this in my law class. Where do we start seeing trouble in the TDS? And a lot of times it has to do with the fact that it's not is the seller occupying or not occupying the property. The issue in paragraph number A here under section 2 is, what items are included in the transaction. So the subject property has the items checked below, okay? And then that includes all of this happy stuff, okay? But then there's the question, so are there, to the best of your seller's knowledge, I remember I remember when I was management at, I've been management at three of the largest brokerages in San Diego County. And I remember, back 20 years ago when, I would have trials that I'd be in, and the attorney would ask the seller, well, did you complete the disclosure statement? And they would say no, and they would say, well, is this your signature? And they would say yes, and they said, well, then you just said you didn't complete it. They said no, the agent completed it for me. So, and so, okay, but this is your signature, so you ratified it, right? Well, no, I didn't really read it. I just went, you hear how the deposition's going to go? Okay, and so this is how they went. Okay, and so I remember I'm on the Zip Forms advisory committee, and I remember, I said to them, I said, we got to start blanking these things out so that real estate agents can't fill these out, because we're getting our butts kicked in trial because they're saying that it was our disclosure, not the seller's disclosure. So, I mean, I always knew because I had these perfect little X's in each of these boxes, and so that was the start where now you see their grade, which means you can't fill them out. They go to, I mean, you could go to heroic efforts to be able to fill them out. I would recommend against it, because not only is it wrong, but then you're also doing something that is incorrect, and you shouldn't be doing that. So are there, to the best of your seller's knowledge, any of the above that are not an operating condition? Now I'm going to tell you something. So I worry about defective TDSs, and I read TDSs every day, and I'm very concerned. So the answer here is going to be yes or no. So the seller checks the box yes or no. This is frequently the most common thing I see missed. So when I get a TDS from the seller's agent, and neither of these boxes are checked, they haven't completed the TDS. They haven't completed page one, right? Because we don't have the answer. Are there any here? And a lot of times they just don't know, right? They'll tab over it, they'll do stuff like that, but they just don't know. And so again, remember, your job is to advise and counsel. Your job is to go over the form with your client and just ask them simple questions. You don't have to go crazy. So it's like, does it have a garbage disposal? Yes. Okay, check the box. Does it have a washer dryer hookup? Yes. Okay, check the box. I mean, come on, right? But when I get down here to the bottom and it says, are you, to the best of your seller's knowledge, any of the above, the not an operating condition, don't stop. Answer the question. If you answer yes, give us a simple explanation, okay? If you answer no, then we move on, right? But if it's yes, you need to say yes. So the seller needs to say yes, okay? And then when they say yes, it says, please explain. What are you talking about? If yes, then describe. Simple explanation. I have one right now where death on the property, right? And so it's California Civil Code 1710. And so duty to disclose the death within 3 years. This death occurred, 6 months ago. So clearly within the 3-year period of time, right? California has that requirement, by the way. In Virginia, it's like, no, I'm familiar with a mass murder there that there was no disclosure and no legal obligation to do so. But in California, I don't know. I think things are haunted, whatever. I get it. I'm okay with it. But are you yes or no? And then answer simply. Okay. So the one that I have right now is they died in the property from natural causes. So you would disclose the cause of the death if asked. But if you are asked, you do not have to disclose death by AIDS or HIV related illnesses. And so, again, 1710, if you've got a death and you've got a concern about it, you can always give me a call. I'm happy to help you. The point here that I'm trying to make is yes or no. And if it is not yes or no, if you don't answer it, then your disclosure becomes a defective TDS. Okay. So I've got some TDS laws in here for you that you can go over. I've got, again, my quick guide, which is the TDS overview for you. I've got TDS and smoke detectors, seller's disclosure obligations. Obviously, I do a lot of research when I do these things. But one of the things that we want to also talk about is, what about my exempt seller? So I want to be clear about this. An exempt seller is someone who's merely not required to use the form. They still must make the disclosure. Okay, so people they don't realize that I mean, even if you're aware of something, you still have to disclose it. Does that make sense? But you don't have to use the form if in fact you're exempt. Now, here's the issue. The issue is who's going to tell them that they're exempt? It's a legal decision. So in every transaction, I've got a couple of them right now, believe it or not, with death on the property, where the seller's claiming an exemption. You know, they were trustee, they got the property by virtue of their being named in the trust, you know, things like that. That doesn't make them exempt. So a lot of real estate agents think that if they're in a trust, they're TDS exempt. That's not true. Okay. There's a lot of requirements in there that meet up with that. Like, for example, you know, have they lived in the property in the recent year? That's one of the requirements, that they are not going to be exempt, you know, things like that. So anyway, a good breakdown of all of that. This is a good, they've got, you click on these links and you get the exemptions, you get the Avid, which I'm going to show you that in a few minutes, you know, things like that. Okay, is everybody okay with that? I wanted to make sure that we covered those items. All right, so going back to my TDS, I get to the top of page 2, and now we're talking about the second big question that most people miss. Are you, seller, aware of any significant defects or malfunctions in any of the following? Yes or no. So again, a yes or no answer, but not a blank. Okay, we need to get a yes or no. If the answer is no, we're going to move on to the next series. Okay, but if the answer is yes, you need to say something about it. Okay, now this, again, the legislative intent was that the seller would disclose what they knew or should have known about the property. Okay, much like in my Easton case, where the agents were really held to, they had to know something was wrong with the property. See all this, you know, wire netting and all that. Now my argument, of course, is, well, so did the buyer. The buyer saw that too, and we've got a lot of court cases since that time that says that if it was readily noticeable by the buyer, then maybe there's no obligation, but I still think it should have been done. I mean, it's just one of those things. Okay, so in this case here, we're going to talk about interior walls, ceilings, floors. We're going to talk about foundations, slabs, right? We're talking about driveways, sidewalks. Now, has anyone here ever seen a driveway that didn't have a crack in it? Okay, and so we're going to talk about those cracks in the driveways and a couple of other things, and how to make those disclosures to make sure that you have fulfilled your statutory duty, which is 2079. At the same time, we want to remember that we disclose, we do not diagnose. Okay, so let's try to remember that. So here, any of these things having a problem, yes or no? If yes, please describe it, and then maybe more. Okay, maybe we're going to go to more. And by the way, so when we do this, we have the statutory requirement, but if you run out of room, there's other ways to fix this, right? What are some of my other ways? I can go to my addendum, right? My addendum, and here it is. So this would become, notice I have checked the box already, because for purposes of this class, transfer disclosure statement, right? So I'm doing an addendum to the TDS. And a lot of people say, well, how do we do it if there's going to be an addendum? In most cases, they just don't even do the disclosure, because we don't have any room. I guess we'll just move on to something. No. You need to make the disclosure. Okay, so this would be your addendum, probably number 1. The box is checked, transfer disclosure statement, and then definitely note an amendment to the TDS, right, may give the buyer a right to rescind. And we're going to talk about rescission rights in a minute, and we're going to talk also about time periods and things like that. So anyway, this part here gets filled out. Again, the recitals at the top of the page. And then we've got buyer, tenant, seller, landlord, referred to as the parties. And then there you go, wax eloquent. It's an addendum, okay? Notice the only people signing these are the buyer and the seller. All right, but I think the best addition they did was when they added transfer disclosure statement. This is my addendum, but just remember, if this accompanies the TDS, then the time period is ticking at that point in time. If it is given later, if an amendment is made, so remember, the seller has a duty to amend. So if let's say that the seller gives the transfer disclosure, like what we do when we take a listing. I'm sorry, Linda's office. When Linda's office takes a listing, the agents get all of the disclosures completed, signed by the seller at the time of the listing. Why? Because when the offers start to come in, which we know they're going to come in, when the offers start to come in, then we're going to send over the disclosures along with the counteroffer, right? Why do we do that? And we're going to see this on the bottom of page 3 of the TDS, that if you send all those things over prior to the buyer committing to the contract, the buyer loses their 3-day right to rescind the contract. Rescind is a very powerful word of law. It says put the parties back in the position that they were in prior to contract. So you can imagine that that could be really problematic for us, right? Because you give everybody goes under contract, the buyer orders the inspections, they start doing things, and then all of a sudden the seller comes back with a TDS, 2 weeks into the deal, and says, "Oh, by the way, somebody died in the property." Okay, just as an example. Again, Civil Code 1710. So that's going to trigger the buyer's ability to rescind the contract. And so what are you going to do about all the money they've spent on stuff, right? I mean, I know I have some people that will say, well, it's good that they spend money on things because then that way they won't back out of the contract. The answer is, listen, every buyer I know will walk away or maybe go after the seller for something, that rather than, buy something that they did not want to buy. Okay. So anyway, enough said on that. Okay. Everybody good with that? Okay, so let's go back. Let's go back to my TDS. Again, you can see why it's one of my favorite forms, and it's really not that complicated. Okay, so let's go down. I want to take us down to the top of page 2 again. This is the one, any significant defects or malfunctions in any of the following. Again, remember, the operative word here is aware. And we're going to see aware throughout this document. We're going to see it in the SPQ. We're going to see it again in the SPQA. Okay. And I know I'm spending a lot of time on the TDS, but this is the granddaddy of all of them. So the TDS starts your picture. Okay. So here's my TDS. I'm going to put my SPQ right next to it. I'm going to put my SPQA right next to that. The TDS is the statutory form. So the TDS, so rights of rescission attached to the TDS because it's statutory. The SPQ, no right of rescission on that because it's a contractual form. It's not a statutory form. So this is why I tell you give all three at the same time. Okay. All right. So have the seller complete all of those. Offer comes in. I use the example. We listed a house in Lake Forest, and the seller sat with the seller for 3.5 hours. They filled out every single disclosure, natural hazard. We had the HOA docs. We had everything. And when the buyer came in with the offer, we sent everything, 188 pages, over to the buyer's agent. Buyer's agent said, my God, I've never seen anything like this. And of course, our response was, well, the buyer may not have a right of rescission. We never tell them what legal right they might have, but we say they may not have a right of rescission. And so sure enough, the buyer came back and said, wow, you told us everything we need to know. I mean, why do we need a 30-day escrow? We'll close it in 13 days, which they did. Literally they had their inspection done. They did all that because we still encourage that inspection, and they did everything, but statutorily they couldn't rescind the contract. They have cancellation rights, right, by contract, like the inspection and stuff like that. You never want to interfere with a buyer's right to investigate a property. You never want to get in front of that. Okay. So that being said, we'll have a couple of other little things in here, like our child-resistant pool barriers and carbon monoxide devices and smoke detectors and water heater strapping are now all included in this document. If you look down here at the bottom, all the current TDSs, right? Please do not use an old TDS. But you see, here's my reference to my smoke detectors. Here's my reference to my water heater bracing. So I no longer need, and I just got a whole bunch of them yesterday from a transaction coordinator. I don't get it. But anyway, I got a whole bunch of stuff, and it was like, you don't need the water heater. You don't need the smoke detector if we're using the current TDS. Okay. And I even got Megan's Law, which I don't need because Megan's Law has been in our purchase contract for about 20 years now. So the Megan's Law, the DBD form, it's called, the disclosure form, database disclosure. We had that. That's just a carryover from old contracts. So again, if your broker requires it, then check with your broker. But when we get something like that, we just say we're not going to sign it. It's in the contract already. We're not going to do that. Okay. So let's go back up. I want to go to paragraph number C. I have never seen paragraph number C completed correctly. I really haven't. And so let's take a look, because I want to spend a little bit of time. I want to drill into this a little bit. So are you, seller, aware? There's that word again. Aware of any of the following. Now, the legislative body added the word mold to this probably about 20-25 years ago, right? And why did they do that? So that you can't say no, right? Because there's just no such thing as a property that doesn't have mold in it, right? Now, I'm not talking about stachybotrys or anything like that. I'm just saying that their mold is everywhere, right? And in fact, my sellers, they'll check yes, and then their explanation down here at the bottom of the page, they'll type in, mold is everywhere. right? It's part of the life process. Okay, photosynthesis, all that kind of stuff. So, but if they're aware of something, then they need to say something. But if they're not aware, then they don't need to say anything, because the operative word again here is that they were aware. But we added the word mold to the form, out of the word mold of the form, to make sure that you read the form. Okay, so it's probably the only thing that you're aware of. I mean, I've got a graduate certificate in hazardous materials management, so I got a pretty good idea what asbestos, what the warning signs of asbestos are. But I'm not going to know even then by looking at it. I'm going to have to go to a lab for a sample to see whether or not it has asbestos in it. Okay, so now my phone is starting to think. Okay, all right, everybody good with that? I can Unbelievable. I'm gonna have to turn all the Google things off in the house because it starts looking things up. So anyway, if everybody understands what I'm saying, number one, almost always yes. But what do I do when I get that TDS? I'll get a TDS, and the seller will go right down the column and check no for everything. There's nothing wrong with my house, the perfect house. I raise my kids in this place, whatever. That is never the right answer. And I'm going to show you at least half of these can't be answered no. Okay, so the second one, for example, features of the property shared in common with adjoining landowners, such as walls, fences, driveways, whose use or responsibility for maintenance may have an effect on the subject property. Well, in 99.9% of the time, the seller says, I don't know whose fence it is. It's got to be somebody's. It's in between us and the neighbor. I thought it was the HOA's responsibility. Highly unlikely, right? But it's going to be somebody's responsibility. So if you don't know, if you don't know, then you don't know, right? But if you do know, then you need to answer yes. So again, I would probably say yes to a wall or a fence, because I'm not really sure if it's not a shared thing. I'm going to assume it's shared, which means I would have some responsibility for it. But can you make an argument that no is okay? Go for it. Okay. Number three, encroachments, easements, or similar matters. All right. Well, all properties have easements, but so I'm going to probably have to answer yes. What's an encroachment? It's something that intrudes on the property. It could be a noise. It could be a private nuisance, public nuisance. It could be water. I had a case in La Jolla where the neighbor was flooding their property in order to get the grass to grow, and of course, it go under the fence, and the subject property was below that other property. So yeah, that would be an encroachment. Okay, I get that. I do have an obligation to explain things to the seller, right? You are explaining the standard form. That's what your license says that you can do. Number four, room additions, all that kind of stuff without necessary permits. I mean, I get a bunch of cases on this, only because people will assume that the square footage of the house is 1,000 square feet. The tax record shows it's 500 square feet. So people just jump right into thinking that means that there were some unpermitted additions. That's not necessarily true. I've had cases where the seller had received permits for the property, but the county, in the process of completing the permitting, did not update their record, and so obviously they're not collecting the taxes on it that they should be collecting. But so there can be a lot of reasons for things, but again, is the seller aware? And so I'm always kind of cautious about that flipper seller who says, we don't know anything about that. Did they get anything in the transaction where they purchased the property that would have given them constructive knowledge of the fact that there were unnecessary, or there was built without necessary permits? So I had this question from a really good broker yesterday. Said, we sold them the property. Now we're selling it again. Do we have an obligation to give them the disclosures from that give the buyer disclosures from that previous transaction? I say, well, okay, so the seller has constructive knowledge of all of those disclosures, right? And the content of those, whether they read them or not, I don't care, right? But now you're going to sell the property, and then these documents are going to surface, of course, after closing. And then how's the seller going to explain the fact that they didn't turn that over to the new buyer? And that's where I have a problem with it. I think that those should be done. I remember when I was working with the rock people, we had whole warehouses filled with disclosures, with forms, and I'm going to show you how to save these in a few minutes. So number five, again, not in compliance with building codes. I've seen things built better than the building code required, but building codes are normally a minimum standard. Fill or compacted. Again, our case in Easton was the part of the property that was on fill. it just wasn't compacted properly. And so is the seller aware whether or not there's any fill in the property, whether it was compacted or not? We had a really good case where the agent made a comment in their Avid that there were some cracks in one of the bedrooms. They always come from the window, right? Because the windows are always put in first. So that's where the cracks occurred. That's where the stress points are. And the agent put in minor settling crack. Well, needless to say, 2 weeks after closing, that part of the house broke off, and it was giving way at the time, but nobody realized it was on bad fill. Okay, it hadn't been compacted properly. So you remember what I always say: disclose, don't diagnose. And so the agent's mistake was in actually trying to diagnose that the crack was a normal settling crack, when in fact it turned out to be much, much worse than that. Okay, any settling from any cause, et cetera, flooding, drainage, or grading problems. Think about this for a second. We always put, even my mother, God rest her soul, I mean, she put all these planter boxes around the house, and she would water them. And so when I had to go sell the house a couple of years ago, I see this spalling on the side of the house where the concrete is giving way because it's been constantly exposed to water. But don't we do that? The water that flows towards the house is going to be a very bad thing, right? Water can do a lot of damage, especially because it sits and it just percolates. It just works on stuff. So you definitely need to be watching about those grading problems or drainage problems. Major damage to property from fire, earthquake, flood, or landslides, and we'll talk about your NHD requirement, your Civil Code 1103.7 requirement, and then zoning violations, non-conforming use. So a non-conforming use, of course, is a use that was legal at one time but is no longer. That means that the laws had changed around. Probably the famous case of that, Roman, would be the Del Webb versus Spur Industries case, which was a case out of Sun City, Arizona, where Del Webb built this great big, 55 plus community out way northwest of Phoenix, and it was very attractive to people that are clearly my age and younger than my age, who wanted to live out there. Of course, then after they built this whole place up, then all of a sudden Spur Industries, which was right next door, which was a stockyard. And if you ever lived next door, if you ever driven by a stockyard, you're going up the 5, past Bakersfield, and you've ever driven by one, it's very clear that it's not rose petals, right? I mean, it's got a whole different smell to it. So anyway, Del Webb, everybody got up in arms. They filed a lawsuit against Spur Industries and said, you need to move. And so the court, it was a brilliant holding by the court. The court said, well, Spur Industries had its time and they were there, but Del Webb brought everybody there. So it's the term that by law, we call it coming to the nuisance. So they brought everybody to the nuisance, which was the smell from the stockyard. So they said, the court agreed. The court said, yeah, Spur Industries, you got to move. But they made Del Webb pay for the cost of relocating them, which was, I thought, a brilliant holding. So anyway, any first year law student knows that case, but it was a great case. I had personal experience there. So neighborhood noise problems are other nuisances. And so you ask your seller, do you have any noises in the neighborhood, like barking dogs or whatever? Where I live in Del Mar, I'm on the bluff, so I've got trains that come right by the front of my property. The very first night that I was there, it was, I thought it was an earthquake. It was really loud, and of course it was the freight train, which came by once a day. And now we're seeing problems with the bluff erosion worse than we've ever had, and so we've seen failures and things like that. So do I need to disclose the train? And the answer is yeah. I've gotten used to it over the 15, 20 years that I've been there, but I still need to make that disclosure, even though I've gotten used to it. Another good example is the helicopters coming by the front. During the summer, their eyesight is poor. They're really close to the shoreline. During the winter, they're out a mile at sea, which is where they're supposed to be. And I always said, because during the summertime they have a hard time. They have to follow the coastline, right? Because you know what I'm talking about. They're looking around kind of thing. So, but in the wintertime, they're way the heck out to the ocean. So yeah, do I have to disclose that? Yeah. If I can read the call sign on your helmet, then you're too close. Okay. All right. CC&R is another deed restriction. So in my house, it's a single story home. about 800 square feet. Can I build a 16-story high rise? And the answer is no. There are deed restrictions, there are view restrictions, especially Del Mar, right? Everything's restricted. Okay, so no, I can't. So what would I check on 12? I would check yes. There are restrictions. It's okay to tell them yes. Like Pete said, they can't sue you for what you tell them, so tell them. Okay, repairs, that's another issue. People tell me, should I disclose the repair? And I say, did you repair it? They go, yes. Well, then I would disclose it, right? You have receipts, all those kinds of things. SDAR has a really good form called the seller statement on repairs. It says, here's the stuff I had other people do. Here are the receipts. Here's the stuff I did myself. Here are the receipts, those kinds of things, right? So pretty good form. We don't have an equivalent form at that at the state level. HOA, which has authority, that may be a no, right? But if there is one, yes. So, and be careful about this, because when you get your PR, you might have to amend this because, for example, what we refer to are the roos in Del Mar. So, and again, I don't mean to picking on Del Mar. North of Del Mar Heights Road, east of Camino Del Mar, there's homes that kind of look like tracks, and we call those the roos. Rue de Antibes, Rue San Monaco. The Rue RUE roos, and so there is a homeowners association there. Nobody seems to be aware of it. The HOA dues are voluntary; they're $100 a year. But when you get that PR and it says that there is one, then you might want to take another look at 12, okay, or 13. There is a homeowners association, okay. All right, so and by the way, restrictions on height, 27 foot, whatever. And then common area, those are the most obvious ones, right? If I have a gated entry, then I know it's common, right? If I have a guard, I know it's common. They have a pool, a tennis court for community use, then I know I'm going to have a common area. So yes or no. Notices of abatement or citations against the property, and I don't want to go into the difference between the two, but essentially, if you let your lawn grow, 12 foot of weeds, fire department's going to probably come by and say you need to cut the weeds down, and they're going to issue a citation for that. And if you don't cut the weeds down, they'll cut them down for you, right? But then you're going to get the bill, which is usually 3 times the actual what you would have paid yourself. So yes, no, that kind of thing, simple one. And then finally, number 16, any lawsuits by or against the seller. So either way, seller suing somebody or somebody suing the seller, you need to make those disclosures. Okay, all right. And then if answered any of the above is yes, so what I do, if the answer to number 1 is yes, then the seller types in 1. When they get this, they can type it in. They have a text field, so they just put the 1 and they put mold is everywhere, whatever, or they put number 13 and yes, there are deed restrictions on the property. So, like I said, when I went through this thing with you, you can see that almost half of these things are going to have to be yes, right? So when I get that TDS that says no, I'm going to contact the seller's agent and I'm going to say, hey, you know what? The seller did not check the box yes or no. Would you like to have the seller amend their TDS, get that fixed? I'm going to send it to the buyer anyway, because this is what you sent me, but maybe you want to get this fixed before the buyer relies on it as a final version. Okay. All right. Okay. Questions about any of that? Again, as I said earlier, the paragraph number D talks about my smoke detectors. Paragraph number D2 talks about my water heater bracing. So again, I don't need the smoke detector water heater statement of compliance, right? I don't need those things. Okay. All right, good. Let's go on to page. So anyway, we did something that we weren't able to do for a long time. We actually got the seller's signature back up onto page 2. For the longest time here, it was the top of page 3, which really made me uncomfortable because I always say, page 1 and 2 belongs to the seller, page 3 belongs to us. Okay, so we don't want to touch 1 and 2. We want the seller to complete 1 and 2, other than the stuff that obviously auto-populates. Okay, is everybody okay with this so far? This is important material. All right, TDS is my big baby right there. Okay. And by the way, when somebody says to you, well, the seller is TDS exempt, what we do is we ask them for documentation of the exemption. Okay. So if they are in fact exempt, then you'll have something from a lawyer or something that says they're exempt. I had a transaction recently where I pushed and pushed and pushed, and I kept saying, you're telling me the seller's exempt. Send me something from the attorney that says that. They ended up taking a picture of an article in a newspaper or something. It had nothing to do with the property. It's just defining what the exemption meant, and it's like, okay, I'm just going to kick that up to the DRE. I'm tired. I got enough documentation. that we had everything, you know, we kept asking repeatedly. So even if somebody tells me that the seller is exempt, I'm going to at least ask 3 times for proof of the exemption, and then I'm going to hand the buyer the TDS blank now, because they're not going to give us a TDS, right? Because they think that's what the exemption means. All right, and so I'm going to give the buyer the blank TDS. I'm going to have the buyer sign off on it, not necessarily in the blanks, stating that I provided them this, and then here's my emails that says I've been trying to get that TDS from them, and they're insisting that they're TDS exempt. Okay, all right, good. So when I look at paragraph or section number 3 now, so remember section 1 and 2 belongs to the seller. When I get to section number 3, it's my agent's inspection disclosure. And again, remember what the law says, that the seller has that the TDS is not complete until the seller's agent provides their Avid to the buyer's agent. Okay. Now I say that, and I say it purposefully. Okay. Why? Because that's what it says, right? It says it's not complete until the seller's agent's Avid goes to the buyer. Okay. But how many times have you had it happen? First of all, I get it all the time. You know, 2 weeks into the transaction, the TC's sending me the TDS, and I'm looking at them and I'm going, has this been, you had this all this time? You know, it's like, do you understand that the time periods are ticking on things, right? So a lot of times, you know, we need some refresher classes, I think. So, and again, I'm preaching to the choir. Some of you here today are TCs, and you want to know, right? So in my agent's inspection disclosure, again, if the seller is not represented, then there's nothing to fill in, right? But if the seller is represented, which is highly likely, right, for what 95%, 94% of our transactions. So again, it says right in here, based on a what? A reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection. Boy, where did I read that? Oh yeah, in the Easton case. Okay, so here I get to see it again, right? So a diligent visual inspection of the accessible areas of the property. Okay, the agent's duty is one of inspection, and CAR finally changed the buyer's inspection advisory to the buyer's investigation advisory, because remember, the agent's duty is to inspect. The buyer's duty is much higher. The buyer's duty is to investigate. Okay, so for me as an agent, do I need to be, you know, picking locks and doing stuff like that? Probably not. But I'm going to wander around the property and just do my Avid. And if I ever get an Avid from one of Linda's agents that says I can't find anything wrong with the place, I'll go out there with you, and I assure you we'll find things wrong. I've had people say to me, I couldn't find anything wrong. I say, okay, send me pictures. They send me pictures. I go, well, what about this? What about that? Okay, so you know, we need to be thorough about things. But again, again, this is when we get into the Avid part of things, there's this box up here that says photos, and I can attach photos to my TDS and to my Avid. Okay, and so a lot of people don't even know what this is for. But if I click on attach photos, it's going to pop up my window that says, all right, which photos do you want to attach? It's really important, folks, because remember, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So, you know, this is available to you when you're doing the TDS and when you're doing the Avid. Okay. So I think you should take pictures. Okay. All right. So then we get down here. I've got 3 choices now. Used to be that the only choices we had was agent notes no item for disclosure, or agent notes the following items. Okay. So I actually had one the other day, and some of you have been in the business for a while. You remember agents used to write in here, you know, recommend physical inspection by licensed contractor. And I remember a trial I was in where the judge said, why is the agent shirking their 2079 duty to inspect the property? I said, I don't know what to tell you, Your Honor, but you have an obligation at law to go inspect the property. Okay, inspect. All right. Okay. So, but I just got one. You know, I hadn't seen it in 25 years, and then all of a sudden, I had a standalone broker, who sent me one, and it said recommend physical inspection by licensed contractor. I said, we haven't done that in 25 years. I mean, that's just, you know, because you know your duty is to inspect the property. Okay. So normally today, what I see is I see this first box checked, and it says see attached agent visual inspection disclosure. Okay, and we're going to talk about that disclosure. I'm going to tell you how to fill it in, and I'm going to tell you who signs it in just a few minutes. So broker, the agent representing the broker, so it would have the broker's name, it would have the licensee's name, whether it's a sales associate or a broker associate. And then I get it down to 4. Now 4 says that you know, if I have a buyer's agent and it's other than the seller's agent, so if I'm in dual agency, I don't have to fill in 4. Okay, but if I'm not in dual agency, then I'm kind of, and there is another agent, then this is a common mistake that I see. The software for the longest time, I think they've corrected it now, but the software for the longest time automatically had the seller and the seller's agent signing at the bottom of the page before the buyer's agent completed their information. So I was constantly, getting a TDS. They'd already signed it. I would complete our portion of the TDS. I would send it back to the seller's agent, and I would require them to have their seller and they re-sign the document. So watch out for that in your signature platform. I'm thinking that they fixed it, but I'm not positive. But in paragraph number 4, why are you signing in 5 saying that you've got copies of what's done in 4 when there's nothing done in 4? Right? So again, remember, if the buyer's agent hasn't completed this part, nobody should be signing on 5. All right. But I do see people doing it. And I'm going to tell you, bad news. You want to make sure that you are, and again, like I said, I'll send it back and I'll say, hey, you know what? You had the seller sign down here in 5, but I hadn't completed 4 yet, and you need to have 4 completed. Now remember, 3 is required in order to have a complete TDS, right? But 4 is going to be required for the buyer's agent to complete, and then same rules apply. It's usually going to be the Avid. And then finally, and again, we have in bold print, buyer seller may wish to obtain professional advice and or inspections of the property and to provide for appropriate provisions in a contract between the buyer and the seller, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So remember, again, no obligation by law for the seller to do any repairs, but the seller still must make the disclosures. Okay. So, and I wanted to bring that up because a lot of times agents will put in listings in the MLS, they'll put in properties being sold in as is condition. And it's like, why don't you just say the seller's not going to do any repairs? That's a lot better than you trying to rewrite the as is clause, right? So CAR goes to great lengths to create the as is clause and explain what as is means. Because in California, the law says that properties are sold in their present physical as is condition. That just means no obligation for the seller to do any repairs. Unfortunately, agents a lot of times and sellers alike will think, I don't have to tell them anything, right? I don't have to disclose anything. That's not what that says, right? And some of you remember the old, seller warranty provisions in our contract back prior to October of 2002, which is over 20 years ago, where we actually had passive removal of contingencies and things like that. But today our contract's very clear. Sales of real property are in the present physical as is condition at the time of sale, and so be aware of that. So once the above is filled out, then the seller will sign it, the buyer will sign it, and then the agents will sign it. Remember, whenever you see signatures stacked, so one on top of another, then they need to be signed in chronological order. When they're side by side, it doesn't matter who signs first. So when I get down to this paragraph, when it's time to sign this, it doesn't matter whether the buyer signs it or the seller signs it first. And I'm probably going to end up with counter signatures anyway, right? They're going to sign on 2 separate forms, but when I hold them up to the light, you call the light test, then obviously they're the same document, then they're enforceable against both parties. Okay, but once I get down to the agents, the buyer's agent should be the very last person to sign this form, right? Seller's agent only after everybody else above here has done it, and then after the seller's agent signs it, the buyer's agent signs it. Everybody good with that? Important concept, okay? Let's take a look at the bottom of this page because this is something a lot of people skip over. So 1102.3, again, my favorite civil code, other than 2079.13, of course. So the civil code provides a buyer with the right to rescind a purchase contract for at least 3 days after delivery of this disclosure now this is a big if delivery occurs after the signing of an offer to purchase. So counter offer back and forth. Like I said earlier, buyer sends over an offer. We send over a counter offer that includes all the disclosures. Buyer hasn't committed to the contract yet. The law says that they have all the disclosures. So we're assuming that they're complete, right? I'm pretty good about making sure they're complete, right? But I'm going to show you the disclosure list here in a minute. But when the buyer signs that contract, they're not going to have a 3-year right to rescind the contract because they got all the disclosures before they committed to the contract. Okay, so that's specifically what the statute says. All right, if you wish to rescind, again, put the parties back in the position that they were in, get your deposit back, whatever, you have to act within the prescribed period. So if you get this TDS after you sign the contract, then you've got 3 days, right? At least 3 days. Now, by the way, they say at least 3 days. It's 5 days if you delivered it by mail, you put a stamp on it, that kind of thing. Okay. All right. So, but we don't, most of us are doing electronic signatures. It's fairly instantaneous. So real estate brokers is qualified to advise on real estate. If you want legal advice, you need to talk to an attorney. People will call me and they'll say, so legally speaking, and I go, oh, hang on a second here. I'm not going to get into that because I can't give you legal. Well, I can, but I may not give you legal advice. I'm not going to do that. We're going to kick that up to the people that practice in law. Okay, but I do get the question, or I'll get, I know the law says, and then I'll always respond, well, I'm not going to help you break the law. I mean, that for sure. I'm not going to jail with you is what I always say. Okay, everybody good with that? That was my TDS. Let's go back to my, let me see, I think I covered most everything in my, so we talked about the exempt seller, we talked about that, the TDS and smoke detector, was the TDS law, the quick guide. These are good materials. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was, so paragraph number 11 of the purchase agreement addresses the statutory and the supplemental disclosures. And so they call them statutory and supplemental rather than calling them statutory and contractual disclosures. Okay, so it's a term, I didn't make it up. It is a term, but we need to be aware of the fact that they address it in paragraph number 11. So for example, in paragraph number 11 down here, we talk about the SPQ, right? We talk about the TDS being signed. I mean, we go to great lengths to explain. This is why this agreement now is 16 pages long. Remember, we were at 10 pages for the longest time, and we were doing everything we could to keep it at 10. Okay. Whoops. Questions. Quick question, Nora. Providing the TDS during counteroffer period. Yeah, get it over there right away. You can provide the TDS with a counteroffer. However, the buyer's agent wouldn't have time to do the Avid. Right. But remember what we said. The TDS is not considered complete until the seller's agent's Avid is complete and delivered to the buyer. The buyer's agent, for purposes of law, the buyer's agent needs to be in compliance too. But the TDS is not complete. But once the seller's agent provides their Avid, now the TDS is complete. So it's not completely filled out right. Well, yeah, it is. So again, the seller's agent, so the TDS is not considered complete until the seller's agent's Avid has been given to the buyer's agent, the buyer. Okay. All right. So buyer's agent is superfluous. The buyer's agent is something else that needs to happen, but it is complete after the TDS is complete after the seller's agent's Avid is delivered to the buyer. We good? Important point. Good catch. Good catch. All right. And by the way, paragraph number 11 talks about that as well. So we'll see that. I have, let me see, but seller has completed and answered all the questions, and the seller's agent, if any, has completed and signed the agent section, which is section number 3, which discusses, or if applicable, my Avid. Okay. All right, so the rest of it is nothing stated herein relieves the buyer's agent from the obligation to do these things, but I'm worried about that TDS being complete, and I want to protect the buyer and the seller, by the way. Okay, thank you, Nora. And Nora, your question's a really good one. I mean, and this is like that big box of pre-printed language that nobody reads. But it really does. I think they did a really good job. This is why it's 16 pages now, is because we decided that we weren't going to keep it at 10 anymore. And so it was just busting to be bigger. And we were doing everything. We were compressing fonts. We're doing all kinds of stuff to try to keep it from getting more than 10 pages, because everybody was already having a heart attack about 10 pages, right? But finally, we just said, hey, we just can't do this anymore. We've got to go to 3. Okay. So to 16. So look at this paragraph. This is a good paragraph. TDS, NHD, other statutory and supplemental. I'd argue supplemental means contractual, right? Other disclosures. And again, they get into that down here when they talk about the SPQ form, right? Anyway, good stuff. Okay. All right. Good question, Nora. Thank you for that. All right, let's head back to the PowerPoint really quick. Moving right along. Good. We only have 300 slides to go. So we took a look at the TDS. So just really quick recap it. Let's talk about the TDS. It's obviously the real estate transfer disclosure statement. The law took effect in 1985 with the addition of disclosures upon transfer of property. And so I promised you I would show you this. So take a look at this. This is, oops, wrong one. Where did it go? Oh, shoot. I didn't pull it up. Okay, hang on a second. Let me grab it. Disclosures, it's the RE6, right? Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to pull up the RE6 for you. Where is, no, that's not it. Holly, help me out, Holly. Okay, is this it? Transfer RE6. Where's my RE6? I just pulled it up. Part one, that's not it. Linda, bum, 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 bum. I just opened it. Where the heck did it go? Okay, all right, we're gonna find it. Where is it? Close that. I'm gonna open the RE6 again. Okay, there we go. So that should, oh, okay, I was looking at it. I'm sorry. 12 years of college down the tubes. So this is the RE6, okay? So transfer and financing of real property, section 1, disclosures required of a seller and or real estate broker agent. Again, this is straight from the Department of Real Estate. So disclosures upon transfer of real property, okay? So here it goes. A lot of the stuff I talked about here today were included in this document, among others, but this is really, really important. So, I'm big into reading the commissioner's regulations, but that's just a summary really quick is going to be, this is my RE6, which is the disclosures upon transfer of real property. So let me pull that back up. There it is, disclosures upon transfer. So this took effect in 1985. It's been amended a few times since then. Again, Civil Code 1102, et sequitur just means and following for the non-lawyers in the group. And I know we've got a couple of lawyers here today. California law requires that sellers disclose to the buyer any material fact known to the seller, okay? Seller knew or should have known, right? So again, remember, they just bought the place, they're flipping it. Now they have constructive knowledge of everything that they were given at the time of their purchase, right? Affecting the value, okay, or desirability of the real estate. And that comes right out of Easton, okay? So that includes the duty to amend. And again, so let me give you an example of the duty to amend. So seller gives all of the TDS, gives all of the disclosures to the buyer, day one. Even in my scenario where we've completed everything, we give it to the buyer at the time of contract. Buyer's got no right of rescission. Okay, but a week later, the police chase the bad guy into the house, shoot and kill him dead in the property. Does the seller, per Civil Code 1710, have an obligation to disclose the death on the property? And the answer is yes, right? So what's the seller going to do? Well, they're going to complete that amended the addendum form, which will which have that box checked that says transfer disclosure statement. Now they've done a disclosure of the death. They have triggered the 3-day right of rescission again. So things do happen. That's kind of an extreme example, but obviously death on the property, it is covered by Civil Code 1710. Seller has to, excuse me, disclose the death. And so the death might trigger that 3-day. Now, again, listen, I got a whole bunch of lawyers I refer to, when somebody calls me up and says, do we have to disclose the death? I'm going to say, well, I don't know. We have a funny little thing about death. So first of all, the EMTs, the people that show up to pick up the cadaver, they're not allowed legally to pronounce death, right? It has to be done by the doctor. So technically speaking, and please don't hang your hat on this, but technically speaking, the doctor at the hospital or the ME, they're the ones that pronounce death, right? So technically people don't die in the property. So this is kind of a fun argument I have with the lawyers, but please don't hang your hat on that. So, if they died in the property and the seller's aware, again, there's no harm for making the disclosure, okay? Like I said, I got several transactions right now where there was a death. I did one, I had 6 of them in a year, the same year of death on the property, and all 6 of them closed just fine, and the disclosures were all made up front, okay? All right, so again, duty to amend, and again, I could pull that up. Let me see, am I that brave? Hang on a second here. I am that brave. Watch this. So I'm going to pull up that purchase agreement again, and it's going to say in here about the obligation to also amend your disclosure, okay? And so where is that? I'm pretty sure it's in here. Okay, so in the event seller or seller's agent prior to close of escrow becomes aware of adverse conditions, material affecting right, blah, 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 okay, or representations previously provided to the buyer under the paragraph, the seller shall in writing promptly provide a subsequent or amended TDS. Everybody follow me on that? So the SPQ, SPQA, whatever, to cover those items. Okay. So, however, a subsequent or amended disclosure shall not be required for conditions and material inaccuracies of which the buyer is otherwise aware. Okay. Or which are discovered by the buyer or disclosed in reports that the buyer has ordered. Okay. So that does not trigger the 3-day right of rescission again. Everybody good with that? Good. I'm getting better about this, Holly. I've got them up on the right form here. Okay. All right. So that being said, remember that you may not waive a statutory right, and that says it right in the contract as well. And I'm going to make everybody seasick if I keep going back and forth. Let me see if I can just put this up here really quick. Yeah, now I gotta go finding things, so I'm not gonna do that. All right, but anyway, here's waiver. So waiver is prohibited. So you may not waive a statutory requirement, right? Okay, so I'm gonna there's solar systems. I'm still agonizing about. It should say solar power systems, right, Roman? Right? You agree with me? Should say solar power systems. They had it in there for up for change. I don't know why they didn't change it. So it tells me they probably have something else they're working on as well. So okay, so you may not waive a statutory. It's against public policy. Okay, since the TDS is statutory, it may not be waived. That includes attempting to contract around it. So I see people being really clever, real estate agents practicing law, writing things like everybody agrees to waive the right to a TDS or waive the right to homeowners association documents or something like that. That's Civil Code 4525, by the way. So there's laws that affect that. Remember, the TDS belongs to the seller, not the agent. Seller completes pages 1 and 2 with the advice and counsel of the agent. Okay. Section 1 has changed. No substitute disclosures. We rarely see it completed properly. Section 2, rarely complete. Incomplete TDS risk defective foreclosure or defective disclosure. Buyer has 2 years to sue. This is a state exam question in California. Okay, so they've got 2 years to bring a lawsuit on a defective TDS. Okay, and in Section C, I've never seen it completed properly. 3 is the seller's agent. 4 is going to be the buyer's agent. And then after all that's done, they sign the bottom. So remember the discussion at the bottom of page 3, which I just showed you again a minute ago. So let's move forward. Let's take a look at my SPQ. All right. So remember what I said? TDS, then my SPQ, then my SPQA, and my Avid is in there the whole time. So without further ado, I'm going to pull up our SPQ form. I really like our SPQ form, frankly. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here it is. So this is the SPQ. Now, the SPQ came out of San Diego. So the San Diego Risk Management Committee had created a form called the Seller's Additional Disclosures, the SAD form. CAR liked it so much. I mean, it took them about 6 or 7 or 8 years to like it, but they liked it so much they said, "Wow, we're going to need to create a statewide form." What a great idea, right? So they did a great job. They created an SPQ that works really well as a blanket over the state of California, but understand that I'm also, San Diego says, okay, that's fine, we get it. You go ahead and create the state form, but we still have some stuff that's personal to us, and we're going to create the SPQA. So we'll get to that in a minute. Please notice my revision date, 6 of 23, okay? This happened on the 27th of June at about 1:30 in the afternoon. So again, it is not a substitute for the TDS. It's used by the seller. I call it unpeeling the onion. So we're unpeeling the onion. If the seller's exempt from completing the TDS, then the seller should complete an exempt seller disclosure or use this form instead. And okay, I'll show you why they say that. All right. So when I get down here to these are good. This is good reading. Would you all please homework assignment, read it once. Just read it once for me. Okay. You'd be surprised what it says. So note to the seller, note to the buyer, and then we discuss. Now we actually tell you, what does seller awareness mean? Remember, the TDS doesn't really explain it. It just says, are you aware? But now we're going to talk about, we're going to define aware. Okay. And then we've got our documents, that are not put into the TDS. And then paragraph number 6 is going to get into this is the language from the exempt seller disclosure form. So that's why at the top of the form, when it says up here, it says, if the seller is exempt, then you provide either the ESD or you can use this form instead. And that's all that means. All right. Everybody good? Good. Okay. All right. And then we get down into repairs and alterations. The interesting part about the SPQ is that SPQ does a really good job of, again, unpeeling the onion from the TDS, the stuff that was really not obvious in the TDS. But then the SPQA comes along, it's going to unpeel it even more, right? And so we're going to find in the SPQA, and by the way, the SPQ is a contractual obligation. It is required by contract. There was no checkbox. Everybody follow me? There was no checkbox in the SPQ. Did I do that right? Holly, help me out. Let me see here. No, I didn't do it right. Okay, so here's my disclosure. Here's my purchase agreement. And when I go up in here and I start looking at the language about the SPQ again, see my SPQ or my SP, there is no checkbox. So it's not an optional form. It is part of the contract. So again, remember TDS, all that, those are statutory disclosures. The SPQ is a contractual disclosure. Everybody okay with that? All right. Now, again, this afternoon, we're going to really drill into this. So repairs and alterations, structural systems and appliances, disaster relief, things like that. And notice anytime they put something in here like 42 U.S. Code 5154A, it's a statute, okay? It's a law, all right? So calling it out. There's no statute on mold, and by the way, the limits of what's toxic mold have really never been determined. So they're different for different people. Pets, animals, and pests. We'll see later on in the SPQA that we really felt like CAR did a great job on it. We didn't have anything else to add to it. What, pet dander or something like that? I don't know. Boundaries, I love boundaries. I always say good fences make good neighbors, but they make lousy property boundaries, right? So I have a ton of these where the buyer says, how far does the property go? And then the buyer's agent or the seller's agent says it goes back to the fence. The fence is almost never where the property boundary is. So do you have an obligation to go out there and walk the lot? I'm going to tell you probably not. But I would probably have handy. Remember what I always tell you when you contact title, I want you to blow up the map, plot and color code the easements so that at least the buyer can see what the easements are. I had a transaction just fall apart a couple of months ago. We ended up coming in as the backup buyer. The buyer on that previous transaction had gone away because they were not allowed to build a pool in the well, they could have built a pool, but they would have gone over an easement, a water line easement, and you can't, unless you're going to build this like really weird shaped pool, they weren't going to be able to do that. They wanted a pool in the yard. So bottom line, boundaries, access, and property use by others. This is time well spent. Now, here's your goal. Your goal is the seller's answering the question, are you the seller aware of? So my hat is off to some of the TCs out there where they're really good at looking at these. I mean, if the seller doesn't check a box, then it really needs to go back and get finished, right? I actually had a lawsuit on that. Which one was it? Was it paragraph 14? Yeah, paragraph 14. I had a lawsuit on this where interesting situation. The seller completed the TDS, but they didn't check one of the boxes, and I'm trying to think of which one was it. It had to do with construction on the property. The seller, I thought it was K, but might not be in this paragraph, but it was paragraph number K. Anyway, so the seller checked everything, but they didn't know the answer to this paragraph number K, so they didn't answer it. And so it got sent over to the buyer and the buyer's agent. And I'm not finding it, but got sent over to the buyer and the buyer's agent, and the TC for the buyer's agent said, hey, you know what? The seller missed, paragraph number K. So it came back and the seller completed K, they checked the box, and then they sent it back over. Well, interestingly enough, 2 years and 9 months later, the buyer, who actually happened to turn out had a real estate license in New York, came back and sued the seller because the seller had, they felt like the seller had deceived them. Well, now mind you, the SPQ was, the first one was completed weeks before closing. The second one that corrected the error also completed weeks before closing. So the buyer had it in their possession weeks before they decided to commit to the property. They just felt like in New York, they do things different than they do in California. So I always tell people, welcome to California. California, the land of opportunity. And so things are just not going to go the way they do in your state, right? But in this case, they thought that they had been deceived when in fact they actually had everything. And the judge agreed. The judge said, you got everything. You had everything. Seller had a duty to disclose what they knew or should have known. They did that. You got it timely. It's not like you got it after closing. So seller said, bye-bye. We're going to give this judgment to the defendant, seller in that case. And so that went really, really well for the seller. So do make sure that the seller completes, and where they check yes, make sure that they answer, give it an explanation. So I'll frequently get these back. I rarely ever have these automatically forwarded to the buyer's agent when we represent the seller. So we'll have the seller complete it, and then I'll go over it. I'll take a look, make sure everything was done correctly. And if there's a yes answer, then I want to look for an explanation. I don't want them to have to do the form all over again. So what I'll probably end up doing is sending them the completed version back. Again, prior to the buyer getting it, completed version back, have the seller, I'll give them, I'll add in the what do you call it, the electronic signature platform, I'll add the text box so that they can actually type in their explanation on that one area, because otherwise it's, I don't want them to have to start over again, right? I mean, that's just crazy. But yeah, it happens all the time. People miss stuff. I mean, there's a lot of things to check, a lot of things to miss. Okay, so is everybody good with that? Anybody have any questions about any of this? I get a lot of questions on disclosure, TDS, SPQ, SPQA. It's funny, we must have gotten rid of K somehow, but there is no K in the entire document now. But there was a K at one point. It had to do with the HOA. And it was really clear that they were doing construction. I mean, they had scaffolding up, they had big trucks on the property, they had stuff like that. Seller hadn't been to the place for like 3 or 4 years, and they had started the construction after that. So the seller literally had HOA docs. The buyer had the same docs because they had minutes of the meetings, they had all that kind of stuff. And so they gave the buyer everything that they had, and the court agreed. You got everything. The seller hadn't even been to the place, so it's not that they have an obligation to go investigate their own property, but references were made in the HOA docs and the minutes of the meetings and all that stuff. So the court felt that the buyer really had everything that they needed to make a decision to move forward. Okay, all right. So that's my whoops, that's not enough. So that's my SPQ. And again, when I get down here, by signing below, the buyer acknowledges they've read, understands, and received a copy. And that language now is permeating almost all of our documents. You've read the document, you understand what it says. If you don't, you need to say something, right? And you've got a copy of it. Okay, so for example, the buyer signs off on the SPQ, and then can they read it that night? Okay, if they read it that night and they discover something about the SPQ that, it's like, wait a minute, I have a question on this. They need to cough it up. They need to say something to somebody and contact their agent, contact the seller's agent, whatever. If they have an agent, that you would not be going through channels at that point. You need to make sure you talk to your agent, but make sure that happens. And so make sure your buyer is aware that they need to be reading this document, and the time to read it is not after. I had a lawsuit last year where the buyer's agent, who was the source of litigation, the buyer's agent said they were asked about, did you go over the TDS and the SPQ with the seller? And the buyer's agent said, everything went to my TC. So now I'm going to tell you folks, listen, I love TCs, but you are the captain of the ship. So if you are the real estate agent, I will, I will always send things to you, but at your request, I will copy your TC. Okay, send me something in writing, but I will copy your TC. Okay, but it's never going to go only to your TC. It's never going to happen in my watch. All right, why? Because the agent's the captain of the ship. They're the one who's responsible for the transaction. Well, in this case, the agent's defense was that no, I gave it to the TC and they sent it to the buyer for signature. Well, did you say anything to the buyer? They said, well, yeah, I told the buyer, if you have any questions, give me a call. That is a really, really poor defense, okay, or a very, very weak defense. All right, so you need to be going over this with the buyer. And I can tell you that the Department of Real Estate is really clear. You have a job to advise and counsel. So maybe you don't know the answers to all these things, but I've seen some things that just kind of got slipped through. I think you should spend time on your transaction. There's not much to do on the first page, right? But you do have some boxes to check. Go through it. If the seller says no on everything, but you're aware of something different, like for example, they say in general, military ordnance with no I in it means stuff that goes boom. And the seller says no, but it's on the Strand in Coronado. The Strand in Coronado at one point was a gunnery range, right? It was a place where they would launch stuff to watch the sand go poof, that kind of stuff. So you need to be aware of the fact that that's what it is. But if you're selling houses in Coronado, again, a really strong case for knowing your locality. You need to be saying, are you sure about that answer? And again, it's the seller's disclosure, but you might want to be talking. And again, I know a lot of agents in Coronado, and they're really good and they know their stuff. But if I'm taking a listing in Coronado, I'm probably going to be talking to another agent in Coronado, make sure I hit everything. Okay. All right, so we're all working together. I want to keep you out of trouble. Frankly, I'm pretty familiar with the disclosures in Coronado. So, is everybody good about the SPQ? Anybody have any questions on that? So let's hit the rest of the PowerPoint. So it is a contractual obligation. It's intended to decode those items that the TDS missed. Okay. It is also the standard of practice. I had an attorney call me on the phone and he says, I'm defending a real estate broker. And I said, I'm sorry. And he said, before I say anything else, the agent did not provide the SPQA form. Okay, so right now we just talked about the SPQ form, but remember, SPQA is the standard of practice in San Diego. The SPQ is the standard of practice in California. So if you're doing a transaction in San Diego, then you need the SPQ and the SPQA. But I don't know that you need to be using the SPQA for something up in Lafayette outside of San Francisco. Okay, are you seller aware of? Mirrors the language in the TDS. Let's take a look at the SPQA. I like the SPQA. And again, it's a San Diego form, right? It is a standard of practice in San Diego County. So let's take a look at my SPQA. And again, remember, we just got on the heels of the SPQ, but now we're going to go to the SPQA. So what's the difference here? So here's my addendum. Here's my SPQA addendum. So again, created by the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors, intended for use primarily in San Diego County area. I don't know why you would use it in Lafayette. It is not covered by CAR's user protection agreement, which means, the user protection agreement, by the way, just says that they will write an amicus curiae, a friend of the court letter on your behalf at the appellate level if you get sued over the pre-printed language. And so remember that in most cases, I don't see lawsuits over the pre-printed language. They're very careful about that, but I do see lawsuits on what we fill in. So again, if you have a question about how something should be completed, you definitely need to talk to your broker. You can always hit me, ask me questions for of a general nature, but I'm not going to give you legal advice. But again, seller's name goes in here, property address, all filled in for you, by the way. But I have had, like recently, I just had a transaction where the seller's agent said, we're not going to give you the SPQA. And so I go, well, why not? And they go, well, because we don't have the form. And I go, well, I'm sorry, it's a standard of care. So I'm going to put you on record that you've said I'm not going to give me that form. I'm okay with it, but I'm going to have the buyer sign a blank one. And the note to them is going to be that I asked for this several times and you wouldn't give it to me. So I know some agents are afraid, oh, don't do that, you'll mess up the deal. It's like, I'm okay messing up the deal. If you're not going to provide me with a standard practice in San Diego County, then I want to be on record for the fact that I asked for it. Okay. All right. So it must not be used without the SPQ. So again, remember TDS, SPQ, SPQA. Okay. So, and then wisely, and I have to give them credit because this was from January of this year. They've updated these forms. The paragraphs below are numbered to assist you in comparing it to the SPQs. Remember what I said? TDS, then there's the SPQ, and the SPQA follows from the SPQ. I mean, they work hand in hand. They really work well. So again, I've got seller awareness. Okay, so you did, we wanted to explain what seller awareness was. And so SPQ 5 means paragraph number 5 from the SPQ. So what does awareness mean? Check the appropriate response for each question. For each yes, give an explanation. If there's insufficient space, use additional. So we just want you to explain what your awareness is of it, okay? And so when the seller says to you, by the way, on any of these forms, well, I don't know, well, then they're not aware, right? But you need to not just take that as an answer. You need to ask questions to make sure. And a lot of times I'll ask them questions about things that they're like, wow, I hadn't thought about it like that. Well, maybe we are aware of it, right? The door does stick, that kind of thing, which is not a TDS question, but okay. SPQ question number 6, nothing to talk about. 7, how about copies of documents? That was our input on that. SPQ 8, structural systems and appliances. Well, we had a lot to say here. Okay, so are you aware of any roof leak during your ownership? Are you aware if the roof at any time has been ripped? Remember on the bottom of page 1 of the TDS, it asks how old was the roof, approximate age. And so now we're going to drill into that. We're going to say, did you put the roof on? When did you put it on? Was it repaired, replaced, resurfaced? When we went to look at my mother's house after her passing, we found out that there were 5 layers of roof on this house. I mean, I'm surprised it didn't get crushed by the weight. So, she was just not in a position to be able to put a new roof on. So she would hire these itinerant people that would come by, and they would just put, lipstick on a pig, right? They would just keep slapping, shingles on top of the old shingles. And so when it finally got torn off, I mean, it was just like, you had to get this great big crowbar and stuff to get it out of there. So, is it repaired, replaced, or just plain resurfaced? Okay. All right. Was there a guarantee or warranty or anything like that? Give us information on that. Are you aware of any hardwood floors versus laminate, right? So hardwood and laminate, 2 different things. And again, the buyer signing. I don't know why we have the date field in here. Most people I know don't complete that. Does it make it more, enforceable? I don't think so, but I'm sure, brighter than minds than mine. Again, the attorneys at SDR are the ones who put this form together, so I'm not going to question. They know what they're doing. They're good, and most of them show up on my approved vendor list. So leased or financed items and systems, not very well handled in the SPQ, at least not to our purposes. We want it to go a little deeper than that. Anytime you see a solar power system, we're guilty of it. We're gonna have to change that to solar power system. Water softeners, water purifier, alarm. Anytime I see an alarm panel, I'm thinking right away, do you own that? Are you paying a service for it? Is it leased? Propane tank. I know we have properties in Del Mar that are on propane. So we need to be asking about the question whether or not, and I can tell you, Linda has bought properties that are on properties that were completely converted to electric because they didn't want to deal with propane anymore. And then other properties that she's got a couple of ranches that she owns, and one of them's got propane, and the owner said, or I'm sorry, the agent said the property was completely electric. In fact, it wasn't. It's got propane. So anytime, and the propane tanks are underground in that case, so it wasn't obvious to anybody that there was a propane. But anytime you see something like that, you got to ask the question: is it leased? Is it financed? And in Linda's case, the most recent purchase of hers, it was actually a lease. It was owned by the company. Okay, so all right. So then type of item and or systems, et cetera, et cetera. You would fill all these things out. The seller would fill them out again. Yes answers. Let's have an explanation of that. Disaster relief. Okay. Again, paragraph number 10, nothing to talk about. SPQ did a great job. Paragraph number 11, pets, animals, pests, great job on that. Paragraph number 12, always an issue. Boundaries, access, and property used by others. Like, do you have an easement? Is it a prescriptive easement? Is it something that's been recorded? People can have an easement on a property that's not recorded. A lot of times we call that a license. A license is usually personal to the person that it is given to. It doesn't mean other people can use it. But again, I teach the difference between a license and an easement, 2 different things. Okay, overhangs, landscaping, pool and spa, water ponding, never good. If you've got a flat roof and you got water ponding on a flat roof, probably going to have, water always seeks the lowest point, probably going to make its way into the ceiling, into the house itself. And then lots of questions about condominiums and developments. Is it a condo conversion, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to go through the rest of these one at a time because I do want to get into my Avid, but title and ownership, legal claims, if any, neighborhood, government, other, multifamily, et cetera, et cetera. And then the SDAR, to their wisdom, provides the last page, buyer's legal duty to exercise reasonable care. And it's all over the statute, right? So you as a seller's agent do not want to interfere with a buyer's right by law to do a physical investigation of the property. So we never keep them from doing that. We had a transaction recently where I represented a Navy SEAL who was retired, buying a property. The seller's agent said the seller's only considering non-contingent offers. And so we said, I counseled my buyer and said, you really can't be non-contingent, right? You're a VA and there's the VA amendatory clause. So there's a lot of things going on. They said, we don't care. We want the house. So it's like, okay. And believe it or not, I was down at the end of the street where they were renting a place that we had. So here we are selling the house down the street. Well, the supposed, non-contingent offer, they accepted another offer before ours, by the way. It was all cash. The buyer never showed up with the money. So it's like, I kind of think you should be going after them, but okay, that's your call. But our buyer slid into place because we had an active signed backup offer addendum. And so we became the primary offer. Again, hypothetically non-contingent. So I remember calling the seller's agent and I said, we've got the physical inspection scheduled for Thursday. And the agent said, you don't have a contingency. And I said, I understand that, but the buyer still wants to do a physical inspection. And of course, the agent said, let me get back to you on that. And so about half an hour later, rather than calling me, half an hour later, he sends me a message, says, go ahead and do your physical inspection. And so he probably talked to his attorney who told him, yeah, don't get in front of that. Let the buyer do the investigation of the property, right? Well, it turned out buyer did the investigation and the seller ended up, apparently the seller wasn't aware of the fact that they were looking for a non-contingent offer because they did about $20,000 worth of work, including pest work. So never get in front of the buyer's ability and legal right to investigate that property. Very, very important concept. Okay, everybody good with that? I love that paragraph, works great. Okay, so let's go back. I have to keep checking. So again, remember the SPQA is the standard of practice in San Diego County. So again, that lawsuit where the attorney said, okay, I know that they didn't have an SPQA, and he says, before you say anything, I know it's a standard of practice in San Diego County. I said, I don't know what to tell you, counselor. I never heard from them again, so they must have settled the case, right? A lot of my stuff gets settled anyway. So again, the SPQA can become a contractual obligation. Let me just show you really fast how you're going to do that. So I'm going to go back up here. Whoops, let's go back over. Let's go to the other one here. Let's go to my purchase agreement. And so on my purchase agreement, I'm going to put this into paragraph 4. And this is where I'm going to do it. And again, it's in our templates. If you want our template, send me an email. But we're going to check paragraph 4B, and we're going to put down here under other SDAR forms, APA, LAD, and SPQA. It's in all of our offers that are going to go out in San Diego County. So we put that in there. We want it to be part of the contract. We want the seller to complete it. Is everybody okay with that? Everybody understand what I'm talking about? Okay. All right. So let's go back to my PowerPoint. So that's how we make it contractual. If you put it in the agreement, it's intended to decode those items that the TDS and the SPQ have missed. So let's take a look at my Avid. I love my Avid. I remember the district manager for the Department of Real Estate making a comment in a meeting that she said, the Avid is the only thing we ask you to do. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that 100%, but listen, when Veronica says something, I'm writing it down because it's like really important to me. I love the DRE, but I want to stay as far away from the line as possible, right? I want to make sure that I'm doing everything by the book. So my Avid form, agent's visual inspection disclosure. So let's take a look at my Avid really quick. Here we go. Agent's visual inspection disclosure. Again, I love this form. It's gone through a couple of different iterations, but again, I want to make sure the most current version here says 12 of 21, and I'm pretty sure that that's accurate. Let me see here. Here's my agent's visual inspection. I can hover over it. It says 1221. Okay, so this is the most current version. Again, the top part here will all get filled in automatically. You'll find that inspection performed by will not get auto-populated, and that's because we don't know who you're writing it for. whether you're writing it as the buyer side or the seller side. So we couldn't create a form that did both. So you would hit the drop down if your company, if you've done these before. And then I'm going to tell you that at the bottom of the form, this paragraph right here, what this means to you. I've had a number of court cases where the defense counsel, which is usually where I am sitting on that side of the arena, as we say, and they have this up on the board for the jury to see, and it says right in there that it is not intended, the agent's inspection is not intended to take the place of any other type of inspection, nor a substitute for a full and complete disclosure by the seller. So we're going to distance ourselves from the seller. So what we're telling the buyer is that don't rely on our inspection and or the seller's disclosure as a substitute for your obligation to conduct a reasonably competent, diligent to do an investigation of the property. And again, we changed the name of the buyer's inspection advisory to buyer's investigation advisory. I think you need to go over that form with your buyer. But once again, this stuff in bold print is very telling, okay? We think you need to be doing that yourself. Is everybody good with that? So really nothing else for you to do on page 1. On page 2, if you're doing units, then you would fill in the unit number. But notice the brokerage name. Once you filled the brokerage name in up at the top, it will now automatically populate the form. But always check, okay? Because I'm going to show you a thing that seems to happen. But over here on the left-hand side, you need to click on the date. Over here on the right-hand side, you need to click on the time. I want this complete. And I've sent this back to Linda's agents who have not completed them. And so weather conditions, if you put in here clear and something goes wrong later, plaintiff's counsel is going to go look at the weather. You know, what was the weather on that date at that time that you had in over here, and see if it's consistent. If you put in here sunny and shining and it was raining cats and dogs, you know, Hurricane Hillary came through, 36,000 missing emails. I got such a kick out of that. I thought it was so funny. But anyway, so Hurricane Hillary was going on at the time. Well, then, you know, you're going to look pretty stupid. Okay. Other persons present. I want to see who were those other persons. And if it's the physical inspector, I don't want you quoting the physical inspection in the Avid. This needs to be your inspection. The PI, the physical inspector, is being hired for a completely different purpose. They are investigating the property. Their inspection, their investigation is not a substitute for your inspection. You need to do your inspection. And oh, here's that language again. So how many times have I got to see this? Reasonably competent, diligent, visual inspection, reasonably normally accessible areas. See, listen, any real estate attorney, I know I'm talking to a real estate attorney when they are quoting, this stuff just rolls off the tongue, right? Because this is how we operate. We operate in that world that says my obligation as a real estate agent is really quite limited. I mean, think about it. And as Veronica said, you know, it's all we ask you to do. Now they ask you to do other things as well, but this is a big deal. You know, interestingly enough, it's like, why do we have them sign the agency disclosure? Why can't we just tell them the agency disclosure? And again, her comment was, you need to be able to defend the fact that you told them. So that's why we have you sign things in writing. Plus the statute of frauds, common law in the Department of Real Estate Regulations in California require anything you do to be in writing. Okay, so entry level area, I put in there nothing noted, only as an example that, you know, I was in the entry level area. I did not notice anything when I was in there. Living room NA, I put in, well, because there's no living room, right? So, you know, maybe it's a house. I mean, I know how, you know, houses are supposed to have living rooms, but it might be a studio or something that doesn't have a living room. So nothing noted is where I was in the room and I didn't notice anything. The room doesn't exist would be an NA, okay? Dining room, I put stains noted on carpet. And again, I'm using these as examples, right? Because remember, paragraph number 2 is the interior of the property. So stains noted on carpet. I didn't go through, you know, red wine stains. It looks like a cordon bleu 1936 or a Lafitte Rothschild. You don't go into that, okay? You just tell them stains noted on carpet. Now, the more precise that you are, the more at risk that you are, right? But all you have an obligation to do is note what you noted. Okay, so stains noted on carpet, that's a heads up, okay, for somebody that would be reading your document. You know, kitchen, if you see, you know, chip tile, whatever. bedrooms, we removed master bedroom because now we're calling them the primary bedroom. Well, let's just call it bedroom 1, 2, and 3. And then we have bathroom 1, 2, and 3. And by the way, if you have more than 3, then do this page again on the next one. Okay. And so, make your notations on that. Musky smell. What are you doing? You're qualifying the comment. Why don't you just say, odor noticed in, bathroom number 3, that kind of thing. Okay. I had a case quite a few years ago now where the real estate agent said, water stain noted in northeast corner of bedroom number 2. I remember like it was yesterday. It was like 25 years ago, 20 years ago. And so, the buyer closes the transaction, goes up into the attic to repair the water stain, only to find out it's not water, it's paint. So the paint was leaking, paint cans were leaking. Now we got hazmat. I mean, that was an expensive lawsuit, all because the agent said water. So stains noted would have been fine, but they qualified it. They called it water, and it wasn't water, and now everybody's going crazy. Okay, all right. So that's page 2. All right, and then I get down into page 3, and so page 3 is going to normally be the exterior of the property. So one of my favorite things is, of course, cracks noted on driveway. So this says this in our template, by the way, because I just never have come across a driveway that didn't have a crack. By the way, I've never come across a slab that wasn't cracked. But most times you don't see cracked slabs, right? Why? Because we cover them with carpet, right? So carpet's very forgiving. But I had a lawsuit where the agent lifted the corner of the carpet in one of the rooms, looked at the slab and said, "The slab looks fine to me." Well, needless to say, you shouldn't have done that. First of all, you do not have a duty to investigate. The buyer has the duty to investigate. Your duty is just to look around. Don't be picking locks. Don't be breaking down doors. Don't go crazy, but you need to look around. That's all. I wouldn't, I'd put my hands behind my back and just wander around. Okay. But what's your obligation outside of that? Okay. So, there really isn't one. But so sure enough, that where he says the slab looks fine to me, there was a fissure in one of the middle bedrooms that literally the slab was like this far off, and there was like a 4.5-inch gap, with earth, and critters going in and out, stuff like that. So please don't say that. Please don't lift up carpet. You don't have an obligation to do that. You've gone outside of your lane, as we say. Okay, but cracks noted on driveway. I bought a house that had a crack in the interior of the property, in the living room. It was a 2-bedroom in Del Mar off of Stratford Court, a little condo, and the tenant had taken the carpet up, and purportedly because, and I asked them, and they said, well, we like the natural look and feel of concrete. I'm thinking like, you're so full of crap. There's this crack running the length of this place, and so I said, does that crack have anything to do with it? Oh no, that's nothing. Yeah. So anyway, I had one of the engineering groups come out and do a soils analysis on it, and the place was built in 1960, right? Echelon, I think it's called, or something like that. So it was built in 1960, and what are you telling me? Okay, built in 1960, and so the engineer says, it's as cracked as it's ever going to be. And so what they recommended, and you couldn't even see through it, right? It was just a crack on the surface. Okay, so he recommended epoxy fill just to make sure nothing, so they did. They drilled down the line of the crack and they put epoxy in it, and we're done, right? But the tenant had taken the carpet up knowing that people are going to freak out about a cracked slab, right? And so sure enough, it worked great, because I walk in and I get a great deal in this place because nobody else would buy it, because they thought this is some big deal. I've sold some amazing houses with cracked slabs that it's like Guy Gary said, how'd you sell that house on the freeway? He said, well, we lowered the price until you couldn't hear the freeway anymore. And so I think it's one of the funniest things I ever heard. And so I still, to this day, I laugh about that. I hope he's okay. But anyway, that was a great comment. We lowered the price till you couldn't hear the freeway anymore. That's awesome. So cracks noted on driveway, back patio, cracks noted on patio. I'm sorry, we're going to have cracks. Okay. But sure enough, if you don't disclose the crack, all of a sudden it's going to be like this Mount Vesuvius thing. Okay. So make sure you make those observations. So now, then I get into the troublesome area for the Department of Real Estate. So based on again, reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection of reasonably and normally accessible area. I mean, people got to think we're kooks, right? It's like, why do you keep saying that? Well, because it's right in Easton. It's right in the statute. And so, we have that obligation. So again, the drop down is going to have your company name in it. You need whoever the firm who performed the inspection. Again, this can be used for the buyer side. This can be used for the seller side. So we couldn't really auto-populate anything. So the firm who did that, so in our case, it would be our firm, and then by who. Now, this is the important part. And the Department of Real Estate says, we want to know that it is signed by the person who performed the inspection. So what they're looking at today is they're looking at teams. And so they go, they realize that the team member goes out and does the inspection, brings it back to the office, and the team leader signs it. Why? Oh, because I'm the team leader. Listen, get over yourself, right? Because the DRE says, we think that's fraud. Okay. Listen, when the DRE says fraud, I'm like, run, don't walk. Okay. Get out of there as fast as you can. Fraud, very bad thing. And again, I like Macaulay, who's our current commissioner, and I've met with him a couple of times. I think he's doing a great job. But we have all these. They have 400 special investigators running around looking at stuff to make sure that we're behaving ourselves. Okay. It's almost always a complaint from a member of the public, right? They have an obligation at law to respond to all complaints. And so they have to respond. Okay. So enough said about that. So if whoever did the inspection signs the form, is everybody okay with that? And if you're on a team that's not doing that, you need to be talking to your team leader about that. You need to be talking to your broker about that. The Lake Forest transaction where we represented the seller, I sat with the seller for 3.5 hours, filled out every single disclosure, while Joe went around the perimeter, went around the building and did the Avid. He's good. He's been a broker since 71. I mean, he knows what he's doing, and he's under Linda's ticket. So we're both under Linda's ticket. He did the Avid. My listing, Joe signed the Avid, right? Okay. So, do it the right way the first time, because you're not going to have an opportunity to correct it if you even remember that what you did. So again, we have the disclaimer, not all defects are observable by a real estate licensee conducting inspection. Inspection does not include testing. Do not turn on water faucets. Do not, I wouldn't even touch light bulbs, things like that. Licensees are not home inspectors or contractors. In fact, CAR has now created a certification program for inspectors because there really is no state-run inspection requirement. And so, I have to tell you that one of the reasons behind that is that they police themselves very well. Buyers should obtain advice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't need to rewrite all this stuff. Okay, it's already written for you. So the agent signs it for the buyer now. Buyer signs first, right? And then the seller merely initials that they got a copy. And then the firm representing the seller would sign. Again, notice my signatures are stacked. And then finally, the last one would be the firm representing the buyer, then they would sign as well. Okay, everybody good with that? That's my Avid. I love the Avid. It's a great form. Let's talk about the TDS again, considered incomplete until the seller's agent's Avid is given to the buyer. Page 1, disclosures and indemnification. Page 2, interior of the property. Page 3, exterior of the property. Remember that your job is to disclose, folks, not diagnose. I'm going to tell you, you'll be talking to me at some point if you ended up getting into, adverbs and modifiers and things like that. Do not try to diagnose the situation. You're not a contractor, right? I have a law degree. I try not to bring my legal expertise into the real estate field. I'm not held to the standard of a lawyer. I'm held to a standard of a real estate broker. Okay. All right. So statutory disclosure, one's required by law. Statutory disclosures contain rescission rights. Failure to make a statutory disclosure may give the offended party a right to reset the contract. In other words, put the parties back in the position that they were in prior to contract. You don't want that, right? You want, when you button this up, you want it buttoned up, right? Is the buyer going to be able to rescind the contract? Guess what? It's got to be material fact, right? But you're probably going to end up, disgorging the deposit back to the buyer. Huge repercussions in a real estate transaction. Contractual disclosure, on the other hand, is one that's required by contract. It's determined by the relationship between the parties. It contains cancellation rights. So again, rescission versus cancellation. Cancellation rights may be an opportunity for the parties to exit the contract without penalty. Thank you for joining us today. Does anybody have any questions about the material? I'm going to get you out a couple minutes early, maybe even a couple seconds early. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've covered here today? I want to help you. I want it to be okay. We have a YouTube website. I will load all these up today being Thursday. Tonight, after I do statutory versus contractual disclosures, I'm going to load all these up into the YouTube website, so they'll be available for you. I always say get your QR code reader ready. Here it is. Take a picture. It takes you right to the website, making it easy for you to find all those. And as I said earlier, anything that I've got, anything that, any material that I've got, send me an email if you want me to send it to you. Hi, Jessica. Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. I will send you the material. Obviously, I did a lot of research on this, so send me an email. Don't put your email in the Q&A field because I lose all of this when we close down. But send me an email. I will send you all this stuff. Okay, it's a lot of really good stuff. I didn't even show you half of it. So so that's the QR code. You can also go to your browser, type in @Burke Real Estate Consultants Inc. I had to create all this because when I start teaching the RPA class, the Department of Real Estate's requiring that I give you access to the forms before you commit to taking the class. I suspect that when I do that live in person, it's going to sell out right away. We might have to do it over a couple of days, a couple of sessions. We might have to do it one day and then do it again another day. We have a bit.ly link for that. So bit.ly/real-estate-ed. Case is important. That's why we made it all lowercase. And please remember to like and subscribe. So like just makes me feel good. So if you go there, like it. And if you subscribe, it'll notify you whenever I update it. So that's all that does. It doesn't send you an email or anything that I'm aware of. It doesn't do for me. So literally, when I log into YouTube, I'll see, oh, so-and-so's got a new webinar that they added to their library, that kind of thing. So I want you to be protected. I really do. It really concerns me. I want you to be okay. And so I know not everybody says that, but it's important to me. I want to make sure you're all right. As I always say, if you look good, you make me look good. I really want you to look good. Any other subjects you want us to talk about, send me an email, copy education, or send education email, copy me, whatever. We'll make it happen. I know that I had an attorney ask me to do a class on agency, and I'm thinking, how am I going to do that in an hour? But I'm working on it. I'm seeing, SDR's had some transitions, so we're going to be fixing some stuff. Weekly email updates. So there's my email address again for those of you looking for it. And if you aren't getting the newsletter contains direct links to signing up for the classes. So you bypass the one that says that the class is sold out. I want you in the class. I mean, you will not sell out. I don't know how many seats. I think we have 500 seats. So sometimes we get close, but I suspect it's not going to be a problem. So please subscribe. If I send you an email, there's a link in the email signature line that includes the access to the videos as well as access to signing up for the newsletter. So if there aren't any other questions, I thank you all for being here today. I very much appreciate the value of your time. And as we say from my hometown of Del Mar, I look forward to seeing you around the track. And hopefully today at 2 o'clock when we talk about disclosures, we're going to go really deep into some of the statutory disclosures. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. I appreciate your time. Take care for now. Bye-bye.